Could you tell us what first sparked your interest in wildlife and the environment?
One day, I remember seeing this green bird, perhaps around this big, fly into a hole in the tree that was outside my balcony. And so I remember getting the binoculars, opening the encyclopedias that I had, and even just asking my mom. And eventually we figured out that it was a white cheeked barbet. It's a common bird you have across South India. And what happened was this bird was actually nesting in the cavity of that tree. And so, as a young child, I could spend those, I guess it was weeks, watching that bird as it raised its chicks. And then I watched the chicks eventually fly out and just find their place in this world. And I think that had a sizable impact on my young brain.
How did that prior interest in wildlife just actually led to you writing it?
I have read so many books from many different fields. It seems to me has been written purposely to confuse the reader. I hate that. People should read, but they shouldn't feel like they are pushing themselves to read, if that makes sense.
I'm sure you faced some challenges while you were writing the story, the book.
So many. Oh my gosh. Writing a book is not easy. It isn't. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is an intensely troubling process at times. It takes a lot of effort. It's immensely rewarding, but it is not easy.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our fourth episode of Trio Tales. I'm Amy Jang and I will be your host for this segment. So I'm a student in Trial World Academy, and if you have stepped into our campus, you would have noticed how happy of a school we are. This place, it allows us to dream bigger and achieve even bigger. So speaking about great achievement, today we have our guest Ishan Shanavas joining us to share about his journey to his achievements. He's only 22 years old, but already a best-selling author of this book, The Light of Wilder Things, and also a founder of Eco Inspire, which is an initiative that helps students and teenagers to engage, learn, and understand wildlife and the environment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so to begin with our podcast, I would like to ask some questions about what was the first thing, like what inspired you. Um, could you tell us what first sparked your interest in wildlife and the environment?
My interest in the environment was sparked by one bird. So I live in a quiet neighborhood in Bangalore. And when I was very young, my mom used to make me sit on the balcony and just look at the trees. And I would spend my time watching the squirrels, counting the squirrels. And one day, I remember seeing this green bird, perhaps around this big, fly into a hole in the tree that was outside my balcony. And I was fascinated. Uh, I was fascinated because I did not know what that bird was. And so I remember getting the binoculars, opening the encyclopedias that I had, and even just asking my mom. And eventually we figured out that it was a white cheeked barbet. It's a common bird you have across South India. And what happened was this bird was actually nesting in the cavity of that tree. And so as a young child, I could spend those, I guess it was weeks, watching that bird as it raised its chicks. And then I watched the chicks eventually fly out and just find their place in this world. And I think that had a sizable impact on my young brain. This also coincided with the time that my family would take these road trips to Kerala. I have my dad's side is from Kerala, and so we would drive to Kerala multiple times a year. And this drive would take us through a forest, Bandipur Tiger Reserve. And so, as a young child, I would like press my face against the glass window, or sometimes even just roll down the window to look at the wildlife around. And so, seeing those animals, all the deer, all the elephants, the occasional sloth bear in that forest, that's what sparked my interest.
Oh, so how did because you wrote a book about wildlife and the environment, so how did that prior interest in wildlife just actually led to you writing it?
I think in some ways, all the books that I had read about wildlife eventually conditioned me into writing this book many years down the line. So when I was, for as long as I can remember, I've been reading books. One is encyclopedias, of course, but I also used to read the accounts of naturalists, people who used to study the environment, wildlife in particular. And I would grow up on their writings, learning about their stories. There are so many names, people like Valmik Thapar and so many others. And so reading their books, being immersed in those stories as a young child, had some sort of an effect on my brain. And I think many years down the line, when I eventually sat down to write this, all those experiences came flooding back, and it definitely influenced the way I wrote. So even in the book, when I recount some of the stories of my time in the wild, I do it very much in that naturalist style because that is the style of writing that I have grown up reading. Among many other things, this was one genre that I was particularly interested in.
Oh, I mean, I went through the book briefly, and then it was really easy for me to understand. There are images, pictures, and all of them. Was there any like specific purpose for you to write in this type of like?
Yeah, I mean, this was something we were talking about before we recorded, right? I have read so many books from many different fields that it seems to me has been written purposely to confuse the reader. I know there are a lot of authors with maybe a certain ego complex, I don't know, where they feel the need to write in a very obtuse, in a very garbled way, in a way to sound, professional. I hate that. That is not what I stand for. I like to, for me, writing should convey whatever I want to say to the reader. That's as simple. And if it's written beautifully, that's a different thing. But if it's written in an unnecessarily complex way, that just doesn't agree with me. And so when I sat down to write this, I was very clear that people should read, but they shouldn't feel like they are pushing themselves to read, if that makes sense. Their eyes should just float across the page and they should just get immersed into the story. I think that's the hallmark of good writing, when it grabs the reader and makes it feel effortless to them. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think reading is an immensely pleasurable activity. And that's something that I want people to feel as well. And that's why I was very clear. Like, I can't control, of course, all the writing in the world, but for my book, it had to be something that just embodied my values. And so, following that logic, I also decided to add those pictures because I believe no matter how much you write about a certain scene or a particular animal, seeing a photograph conveys meaning in a way that words cannot. And so that's why, obviously, I added those photographs. Even in the beginning of each chapter, I decided to illustrate because I think art in some ways conveys something that writing cannot capture. So that was how I thought about writing while I started writing the book.
Oh, that's really interesting. I would love to read more of from this book. But for our listeners, could you walk us through what the book is about, like briefly?
Yeah. So the book is the story of my life, specifically the time from when I was 14 to 21 years old, searching for wildlife and nature as a teenager. So I was very fortunate to do some of my schooling in a boarding school that was deep inside a forest. It's a very weird thing to explain because people don't get it. But my boarding school was 150 kilometers from Bangalore, nestled in a forested valley in Andhra Pradesh. And when I say that, I literally mean that, especially the boys' hostels were right up against the surrounding jungle. And so that meant that I studied next to wildlife and did my schooling next to wildlife. Just to illustrate this, I would wake up not to an alarm clock, but I would wake up to peacocks calling at exactly, I think it was 6:05 from the surrounding hillside. And I mean, I can tell you so many times, especially because uh, all the boys' hostels were next to the forest, unlike the girls who were in the center of the campus and had access to everything. The boys were at the edge. And I remember waking up on numerous occasions in the morning, early morning, perhaps 4 a.m., 3 a.m., to some sound outside my window. And so I would open the curtain with my eyes all blurry, and I'd see a wild boar just across the mesh, just looking at me, perhaps this far. And so that influenced me a lot. I became that student who would go bird watching every Sunday. I began rescuing frogs, scorpions, eventually a couple snakes, especially when these creatures accidentally came inside the buildings, like when they slipped inside the building, someone had to take it out. And so I eventually became that person. And so I can tell you so many times when my friends would say, Shan, there's a frog
Oh, and then
on
you
my
have to
bed.
catch it.
Can you take it out? And so then I would do it.
Oh, I mean, it's. I think it'll feel like you're living in a zoo. Then, like, you don't have to really
Yeah.
visit a zoo
Yeah, I
separately.
mean, I don't think of it as a zoo because a zoo is a very controlled
Yeah,
environment. Right?
that's.
This is wild in every sense of the word. I can tell you because it's such a big campus. It's 360 acres, and so I would have to walk to the dining hall, or I'd have to walk a sizable amount to my classrooms, or to the auditorium, or to the art center. And so when I often I would see wildlife while walking from one place to the other. I can tell you so many times I would. Uh, I mean, I've been late to breakfast so many times because I'd see a snake just crossing the road. And obviously, if my choice was to either have breakfast or to look at the snake, I would obviously choose looking at that snake. Yeah, and so I mean that was the nature of a lot of the encounters that I had.
Oh, that's a really interesting story. But I'm sure you faced some challenges while you were writing the story, like the book.
So many. Oh my god.
Oh, could you talk about some of them?
Yeah, right now I get a lot of people telling me that they want to write a book and they're asking me for mentorship. And this is something that I say upfront. Writing a book is not easy. It isn't. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is an intensely troubling process at times. It takes a lot of effort. It's immensely rewarding, but it is not easy. And so I'm the kind of person who I don't want to spend too much time planning. And so when the idea came to write the book, I said, at least my logic was, a book gets written by writing a certain amount of words every single day. And so I just opened my laptop and I just started typing frantically. But the problem with that approach was I did not have a structure in place. At least I did not have a good enough structure. And so this book actually went through three different structures. And imagine writing 70,000 words. Okay, it's not a small sum. And then realizing that you have to rearrange everything. It's traumatic.
Yeah,
I just remember,
that sounds really
yeah,
traumatic.
and I
Yeah.
had to do this twice because I
Oh,
started with a certain structure. Then after I reached a certain stage, I realized, oh, this doesn't work. I have to change it. And so I changed it to something else. And then I wrote another, I want to say 20, 30,000 odd words. And then I realized I had to change it again. And I remember that day I was at university and I was just I just took the day off. I went and I looked at some trees and I had to calm myself because it's such a troubling process. Yeah, writing a book is not easy because it demands a certain discipline. You know, people have this romantic idea of writing books and becoming an author. For some reason, people are very obsessed with that label. I don't get it. But writing a book involves showing up every single day and hitting your daily word count, even if you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it, you just need to uh, get yourself through it. You can write absolute gibberish, but you need to hit your daily word count because that builds the writing muscle, and that is very crucial to creating something of value.
like the book. So if I want to become an author, is there like one tip that you want to give?
If you want to become an author, you are not allowed to think about publishing or any other ancillary topic until you write 10,000 words. All right. So come up with what you think is the best structure for your book at this particular time, and then write 10,000 words. Don't talk to anyone about it. Don't tell anyone you're writing a book. Just write 10,000 words. And once you reach that stage, the clarity that you will get, you yourself will know what direction your book needs to take. First, write 10,000 words. That's something I say to everyone. And 10,000 words is not a lot. Okay, uh, no, as in you can get through it. Let me give you a large time frame. Within a month, you can easily do 10,000 words. Okay.
I think that's a great tip. Write 10,000 words with the same structure. So Ishan, so I was wondering because we are talking about the environment and the wildlife. Many students or like many teenagers, young people wonder how they can help the environment or like get involved with like wildlife and all. So, and you have mentioned in the earlier interviews and other interviews that it's as simple as just stepping outside your front door. So, are there like few examples you can give, like which we can follow?
See, let's break this down. If you want to help, let's I mean, and the environment is a broad, encompassing term. Let's narrow it a little bit. If you want to help wildlife, for example, the only way you can help wildlife is by knowing a thing or two about it, right? Fair argument. That starts by actually learning about these creatures. Then the question comes, okay, Ishan, wildlife is only found in these far distant corners, in the polar caps or in the deepest of oceans or in the deserts or in the rainforest. Yet, right now, actually, where we are sitting right now, there is a wetland, which is a lake with the surrounding habitat, maybe 20 kilometers, maybe not even 20 kilometers, maybe 10 kilometers from where we're sitting right now, full of wildlife. It is a place that has around 300 bird species visiting that area around every year, give or take. Yeah, no, so that's my point, right? So people labor under this delusion that wildlife is only what is found out there, when in fact wildlife is found everywhere. And that's why I say, if you want to save wildlife, you need to learn about wildlife. If you want to learn about wildlife, you need to go in search of it. Reading is great. By the way, I think people should read about wildlife.
No,
That's
I
why,
love
I wrote a book about it. But it also involves putting yourself in the field. And then when people think that they need to go to far distant places, I tell them that is not true. Step outside your front door and look around you, because there's a lot of wildlife to be found where we live. I mean, it's a testament to my story, right? I told you in the beginning
Yeah.
that I got interested by seeing this particular bird that nested outside my balcony. So I didn't even step outside my front door. And so that's something that I'm trying to get more people to do. I want people to observe their surroundings, because if you just make a deliberate effort to look around, trust me, you'll find more than you would have imagined.
So I think we all can like look around our surroundings. Yes, I think that's a great way of
Yeah, let me just add to
engaging.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. I'm just saying something that I tell a lot of students, people your age and even younger, is that I want them to look around their campus.
School campus.
Yeah, school
Yeah.
campuses are often quite green.
Yeah.
Schools make a deliberate effort to plant trees and make the space look nice. And so I would encourage you, when you're going to the playground or when you're going between classes, to just look at the trees. Trust me, you will find something that you didn't expect. And when that day comes, you can send me a message. Okay?
Yeah, I will try looking around my campus and I will. Mm, so, yes, look around the campus. So, in the book, you also mentioned something about the pandemic. Like you were going through the pandemic and you were studying. So, during the pandemic, was there anything that you did to like with the wildlife or like the environment?
I did something tangential to that. So I think the pandemic was a very bizarre time for a lot of us, for the whole world. Can you imagine? It's such a weird story to tell. All of us just shackled ourselves at home for an entire year. I spent a lot of time, of course, on that same balcony looking at the birds that came around. And in fact, because there was such a drastic drop in activity, I think the bird life around my house grew, exponentially. And so I would see a lot of interesting birds that normally didn't come to that area. I remember seeing this one particular bird called a shikra, which is a predatory bird, uh, attack something else and just eat it in front of me while I was sitting on my balcony. So that was great. But I also started, and this relates to the more entrepreneurial side of my work. I started writing online. So I came across this idea that whatever you're interested in, by writing about it on the internet, you can build an audience of like-minded people, and that will help you uh, in that space further down the line. And I thought this was a great idea. So I learned how to create a website, and I started writing a lot of the stories. In fact, in the book, can trace their lineage back to articles that I wrote on the internet, just writing about these stories and about my experiences, and that eventually grew into, of course, some of the environmental work I do on social media. So I do believe in audience building. I do believe that it has immense power to champion certain causes or to build certain products. In fact, the book has done so well primarily because I had built an audience of environmentally inclined people. And so once the book was out, I had an audience of people who wanted to buy it, right? So
So they were already engaged with
yeah, they were
your
already engaging with
contents.
my work, whether it
Oh,
was with
okay,
my
yeah.
writing or whether it was with my Instagram and so on and so forth.
YouTube.
Yeah,
I
and
know.
not YouTube, not yet,
Oh,
but all
okay.
these other different platforms. And so that's why I think of the pandemic as one of those turning points in my life, because if I had not come across this idea of writing on the internet, I don't know where I would be. Like I think it's so fundamental to who I am. Yeah, so it was very much so. I think, I mean, of course, the world has been negatively impacted greatly by the pandemic. For me, this was one positive that I have from that time.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting how you combine your personal experiences with like your like the environmental insights to a book and articles and the website. I think it's Eco Inspire.
No, no,
Is there another website?
no. So EcoInspire is the venture I built
Okay.
afterwards, which can also trace its lineage back to a lot of this.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you everyone for listening to our first segment of this fourth episode.